Hello, my name is Kevin. I am a First Nations advocate with Dementia Australia. For more than 50,000 years, we have come together to trade knowledge, to learn and to teach. Today, we join to keep up that tradition. So with that in mind, we now pay our respects to the traditional owners, to elders past and present, to those First Nations people joining us here today.
I wanted to just throw myself on the ground and have a tantrum like I was a toddler. It just felt so unfair. I did not want to step into that role, but it just happened overnight. As is often the case, sadly, a lot of their friends and even family just disappeared. And I was kind of the only other adult in the house for him to vent to talk to bounce ideas off. So I would come home from school and just get these daily dumps and downloads of what I'd missed that day and what had gone on. And I just did not want to hear it. I didn't want to know. I wanted to sit there with my fingers in my ears and go, la, 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 la. Like I didn't want to have to deal with any of that.
Tully Smythe was still a child when she noticed her mum was, well, not exactly herself.
It was just small things at first. Misplacing the prize for their annual Christmas scavenger hunt or losing their car at the shops.
And then it was bigger things. And then everything.
This is Hold the Moment, a podcast from Dementia Australia. These are real stories from people living with dementia, caring for their loved ones, or professionals who support people along the way.
I'm Jim Rogers and I'm living with younger onset Alzheimer's.
G'day Jim, I'm Hamish Macdonald.
Hi, Hamish.
I cared for my dad who was living with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia. While she was still in high school, Tully learned that her mum had been diagnosed with younger onset dementia. She was just 51 years of age. So for the next 17 years, while her friends lived regular teenage, regular young adult lives, Tully lived an entirely different experience.
Today, Tully is a writer, content creator, and now she's an ambassador for Dementia Australia.
Tully, welcome to Hold the Moment.
Hi, thank you for having me. I feel so honoured to have been included this season. I've been waiting for the call-up, patiently waiting by the phone.
Well, we always save the good ones till last.
Jim always keeps people waiting. That's the thing. Tell us a bit about your mum. So her name's Kay, was Kay. Mm-hmm. Tell me about her.
Oh, I always say that she kind of was the original girl boss before girl boss was a thing. She worked full-time. My parents both worked full-time. And she really cared about her career, was a real career woman. She kind of had all the power suits and she'd work these long hours and be this absolute, powerhouse of a woman running her own recruitment agency. And then she'd come home, would have these big dinner parties on the weekends. She was kind of doing it all. She was just the best, vivacious, loud, very big heart. She would cry every night at home and away, didn't matter what was happening. There was always something worth crying about in home and away.
Very emotional.
Yeah, very emotional, something else that we have in common. But she was just, this absolute powerhouse of a woman, 3 kids. Her and Dad married a little bit later in life, so they had us a little bit later. But yeah, she was the best. My childhood I was really, really lucky, really privileged.
How old were you when you first noticed something was changing about your mum? And what was it that was the first thing you started to notice?
Well, she was diagnosed in 2002. She was 51 and I was 15 years old. And I have 2 younger brothers. One is a year younger than me and then one was 9 at the time. That's when she was diagnosed.
That was young.
Yeah, very young. As I said, they had us later in life. So, but things like Dad thinks there were signs from as early as 1996. So that's a good chunk of my life. But I guess for me, what we noticed were things like losing a car, which we've all done before, but it was consistently,
Like in the car park?
In the car park. At the shopping centre we'd gone to since we were kids. Dad would have to come down in his car and do happy laps trying to find the car. Opening the fridge and having 4 bottles of milk.
Because she'd forgotten.
Yeah, and she just kept replacing it. Stuff like that. I mean, we had a Christmas advent calendar that she would do little treasure hunts for us rather than chocolate. And she'd write these, little riddles and they'd rhyme and you have to run to the place and there'd be another little clue. I remember one year she couldn't remember where she'd hidden everything. So the clues didn't make sense. They didn't lead anywhere. And I remember being really surprised at that because she'd always pulled that off.
Usually so on the ball.
Yeah. And I was like, what do you mean you've forgotten where you've put everything? Like, what? So stuff like that is probably what I first noticed. But Dad definitely worked his butt off to keep a lot of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes pretty under wraps.
When things started to change with your mum and the roles started to flip a little bit, going from being one of the kids to suddenly feeling like a parent or an adult in the house, how did that look in a day-to-day basis?
I mean, I hated it. I really hated it. I wanted to just throw myself on the ground and have a tantrum like I was a toddler. It just felt so unfair. I did not want to step into that role, but it just happened overnight. I actually loved going to school because it was a place where I could pretend none of it was happening. No one at my high school knew what was going on back home. I stopped having friends over because she was embarrassing me and I didn't want to have to explain what was going on and why she was acting strange and, why she was forcing my friends to talk about the magnets on the fridge like they were her, again, prized possessions. But very quickly I'd come home and Dad, who had gone, we'd gone from a 2-income household to a no-income household. Dad had to quit his job to become Mum's full-time carer. And as is often the case, sadly, a lot of their friends and even family just disappeared. And I was kind of the only other adult in the house for him to vent to talk to bounce ideas off. So I would come home from school and just get these daily dumps and downloads of what I'd missed that day and what had gone on. And I just did not want to hear it. I didn't want to know. I wanted to sit there with my fingers in my ears and go, la, 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 la. Like I didn't want to have to deal with any of that.
Was he sort of chatting to you because you were in it as well? Like you're in the house and so you really understood everything, whereas other people maybe didn't?
Well, I don't think he wasn't talking to anybody about what was going on. He did not lean on or reach out to any of his friends, and they certainly didn't sort of come knocking to ask if they could help, sadly. I think it probably has a lot to do with the fact that Dad probably did keep a lot of it to himself. He's of that sort of generation that think that, my wife, my family, I should take care of it. But he had no one else to talk to. And very quickly, suddenly, we were having to make these decisions together, like joint decisions about Mum and her care and her health. And I was like, I'm not qualified for this. Like, I don't know anything about anything. I'm a teenager. I don't know what the best decision is. But I did notice very early on that I felt this responsibility to be my mum's advocate. I don't know if it's because I was the only other female in the house, and I did often feel like an alien in that house. I felt really misunderstood and isolated and alone. But very early on, I felt the need to advocate for her, to put myself in Mum's shoes and think about what Mum would want, and that sometimes caused conflict and friction with my dad.
Can you give me an example of something that you felt uniquely placed to advocate for your mum about?
Yeah, I can. So, look, it took so long to get the official diagnosis. We tested for everything under the sun. Sleep apnea, menopause, UTIs, brain tumours obviously is one that you know.
Which often dementia goes with all of those things, doesn't it? And those are usually things that have to be ruled out.
Yeah. But also when you have someone that's so adamant that they don't want to go to those tests and they don't want to have those, which I fully understand. Yeah. It was an even more drawn out process. She'd say, I don't want you coming with me to my dad.
And she sounds very strong and powerful,
yes, which was great when she was well. But when she started, losing her grasp on reality, that stubbornness became very tricky to deal with. But I remember by the time we got the diagnosis, so much had happened and the decline was so rapid that Mum wasn't really with it anymore. And Dad and I had a discussion about whether we should even tell her. Dad didn't think there was any point. He didn't want to upset her. He thought that it doesn't even matter at this point. And I really strongly believed that she had a right to know and that she should know, even if that means sort of telling her multiple times.
Have you been able to talk to your dad about that since?
No. I always get really nervous when I do interviews like this because I don't want to upset him. further. And I always sort of nervously send him the link, and we email. This is an emailing family. I actually got an email from Dad basically telling me that it was time for Mum, and I screamed and shouted in my apartment by myself in Melbourne. I just couldn't believe that he'd emailed me that information. But that's just what we've done since this diagnosis. Mum was the feeler. Mum was the emotional one. Mum was the blubberer. And I feel like in losing her, we kind of all forgot how to show emotion and how to connect and how to outwardly love each other. So yeah, the ramifications of something like a diagnosis, it whirlpools and ripples on for years and years.
Your mum was in care for quite a long time, and I read that you'd said that you were almost angry that your mum took so long to die. Can you sort of explain what you meant by that?
So it's crazy. It went from me, living with this big secret at home and not telling any of my high school friends because A, I was embarrassed, B, I didn't think they'd get it, to suddenly one of my best friends from high school, her dad was diagnosed with young onset dementia, which was wild. And in fact, it was this really beautiful moment where she kind of came to me and said, I'm so sorry that we were not there for you during high school. I'm so sorry that we didn't do more. And I said, you didn't know. We were kids. And I didn't know what I needed. Like, even if I'd told you, I wouldn't have known what to ask for. What could you have done? What I wanted was for someone to help my dad and someone to, take care of my mum. You couldn't have done that anyway. But her dad, very quickly, his decline was unbelievably rapid. And I think within 2 years, he'd passed away. And I sat there at his funeral, seething at my best friend's dad's funeral, which was a conflicting feeling. But I was just so angry. I was so angry that his journey and his, illness had been so quick, because Mum's was just dragging on. And I thought, it's unfair. It's unfair that he got to...
It's cruel.
Well, it's just no way of living, is it? This is why when I met you, Jim, I was so blown away and really touched and just so amazed by you, because it just didn't feel like we ever had this great period of knowing she had early onset, but she was still okay, and it was... You
didn't have making the most of it.
No, it was just bad, all really bad. And when I met you, I could not believe just your positivity and your optimism and your zest for life and your determination. It was so inspiring. And it made me really sad that we didn't get that with Mum, or, she didn't get a chance to, I don't know, I was just like, wow, it can look so differently if you just sort of try and change your mindset and look at it from a different point of view.
Looking back at your experience as a young carer, what resources or support would have made life easier for you or your family, or what sort of things would you like to see out there? Yeah,
I think that there is still, sadly, a big gap in that market. I think that, Dementia Australia, the 24/7 helpline are so great, but there is still this sense of really wanting community. I think that my DMs are full of young carers because I'm kind of like this beacon of light. They see, oh, she gets it, but I'm just one person. And they all want to connect and feel understood by each other.
Because it's so unusual, right?
Yeah, and I feel like there needs to be more resources for young carers. But for now, I have, a group with over 500 members on my Instagram of young carers. So for me, there needs to be sort of more support for them, more community. They just want to go to a pub on a Sunday and have a few beers, maybe talk about dementia.
Offload, just
maybe
chat.
Not. Maybe just talk to people that get it, that
it's like
understood.
a comfort.
Yeah, and that group chat goes off. It is popping off every day, either with, hey guys, I've just had a really hard day, I just wanted to vent, or a question, hey, does anyone have any advice on what I could do in this situation? And they come together and they share, whether it's books, resources, podcasts, it's a really beautiful space, but it's only in my Instagram DMs.
Yeah.
And I really want to work on creating something more formal and more substantial for young carers for the future.
I was dismissed for my age at times, even say like 10, 11 years old. Kind of, what would you know? You're only a kid, when in fact, it'd be a surprise what I would know at 10 or 11 when I was doing a bit more of that. I see Mum day in, day out. I know the signs. It wasn't easy. It felt like, I feel a lot better talking to a brick wall than some health professionals at times, going, why won't you just listen to me? Just listen.
John is another young carer, but he's still in the thick of it.
Yeah, that's right, Jim. And it's particularly amazing given that John only just celebrated his 25th birthday. His caring career actually started around the age of 5. John's mother lives with depression and anxiety, and with his dad working shifts to support the family, John had to take on some of the caring duties early.
And today, he's now also caring for his grandmother, or, as he calls her, his nonna, who lives with dementia and Parkinson's disease.
How are you going today, John?
Yeah, not too bad.
Nice to meet you, John.
Nice to meet you too, Jim.
So you're caring for a loved one who's living with dementia, but you've got almost an entire lifetime of practice under your belt. Do you remember the first time you were in the role of carer? How old were you?
I started caring at the age of 5.
And do you remember back that far, or is this just what you've been told?
I can't quite remember back that far, but it's just something that, I've been told, but I can base it on with circumstances and events that have happened.
And do you know what it was you were doing in those initial stages? What were you stepping in to help out with?
Yeah, so I was starting to help out care for my mother who has mental health issues, and some of the things that I was doing in those early years, about 5 years old, was being there to provide a little bit of emotional support, and then also doing some light household, duties that I could at 5 or 6, by doing a little bit of washing up. I couldn't quite reach the sink, so I had like a little step stool to get up there and wash up and dry up.
Was it scary for you at times with your mum?
Yeah, there were a few times that it was scary, because the panic attacks, they can vary in the severity as well and how long they last for. And then also, seeing Mum go into an inpatient unit as well. That the first time she was in there, that was quite scary, even visiting there as well.
And because your dad was working shifts, right,
Yeah.
at that time. So I imagine in some of these circumstances, it would have been you alone.
It's a lot of responsibility as well,
Yeah.
for you to call, when do you call an ambulance, or when do you it must have been quite hard to recognise when do you step up.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, so you're right, Hamish. Yeah, there were times when, Dad was doing shift work. So either he'll be at work or he'll be sleeping. So, be up to me to try and be there. There's just something, it's hard to describe, but there was something to know when to call an ambulance and when not to call an ambulance. It was just something, you can't really learn it from a textbook. You can only learn it through
Lived experience.
lived experience, exactly.
I'm curious to know, given that you are young still, but you were young doing all of this, but learning to advocate, did you find that there were circumstances where people dismissed you or ignored you because they looked at you as a child?
Yeah, I was dismissed for my age at times, even say like 10, 11 years old. Kind of, what would you know? You're only a kid. When in fact, it'd be a surprise what I would know at 10 or 11 when I was doing a bit more of that. Also when I started doing that kind of things. Yeah, it wasn't easy. It felt like, I would get more. I would feel a lot better talking to a brick wall than some health professionals at times.
That
But
would have been highly frustrating, wouldn't it? When you really do know your stuff and you're so young, you've got a wise head on your shoulders.
yep, very, very frustrating. I got angry as well a few times. Not there in the appointment, but afterwards, going, why won't you just listen to me? Just listen. If that's the only thing that you do is listen, and then do that.
Also, for the past few years, you've not only been caring for your mum, but you're also now caring for your grandmother, who you call Nonna. So tell us a bit about your Nonna.
Yeah, so Nonna's moved up from Sydney to Central West New South Wales, and she's currently in a nursing home, and yeah, she's got Parkinson's and dementia.
What was that like, the realisation that your grandmother was going to need help and support as well?
It was something that was on the cards, but it isn't on the cards until it hits home, and you need to make those arrangements and look at selling the house and doing all that to get it to move. But as you can see, it's a bit emotional, to talk about it. Yeah, well, it wasn't easy because, seeing her doing everything that she was doing, us going to Sydney, her doing the washing, doing the laundry, cooking meals, doing the traditional nonna things that you would expect from an Italian grandmother, to now to not doing anything and just going downhill quite quickly.
I imagine that this would have been particularly hard from the perspective of, with your mum facing her own struggles with anxiety and depression, and that would have been very difficult through your younger years. I have a feeling you would really have lent on your Nonna for her strength and support, because not only would she be concerned for your mum, but for you. And so to sort of have those tables turned a little now, where she's the strong one of the family, that must be really hard to handle for you, to see her not herself and not that supportive strength behind you. How's that been?
Yeah, 100%. As you were talking about that, I can think of a few times when Nonna has come up to Central West New South Wales to help care for Mum, because, she was seeing how much I was doing, but also wanting to be there for her daughter. And now she can't do that. And I know that, I can tell that there are times when she wants to help out, but she can't. I can see in the emotional with her as well, because she has opened up to me a few times about, I want to do some cooking, and I want to do some of this, and I want to do some of that. And it's like, how do you say no? How do you say no to Nonna? Yeah, it isn't an easy conversation to have.
I think maybe you're saving a lot of money on fruit at the moment. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so they're definitely saving a lot of money on fruit. So Nonna's still being Nonna and wanting to make sure, that we're all getting fed. So her way is that when she goes out, she likes to grab some fruit from the fruit shop, as she calls it. And whenever we go visit her, we always have to make sure that we bring a bag or two, because there'll be a diversity range of fruit for us to bring back. So there's been times when we've made some banana bread, I've taken some fruit to work, given some fruit to some neighbours. So it's good to see that Nonna still hasn't forgotten about being a Nonna and thinking about her family.
Where is she keeping the fruit?
In a secret stash in the drawer.
all over her room. So some could be in drawers. We've purchased a nice fruit bowl for her, so she'll put some in there. Anywhere that she can hide it so other people don't see it, or even in her basket in her walker.
Okay.
That's such an Italian thing as well, for the Nonna to be feeding you up and making sure you're looked after.
100%.
And obviously Italian was her first language. How's she going with English now? Because obviously some people regress, other terms for it as well, but they might lose some of those capacities.
Yeah, so she is going more into speaking Italian. So another role that I do provide for her is being a translator. I might not speak fluent Italian, but I speak enough to get by. So so she is losing her English and reverting back. to her first language, Italian.
Is that distressing for her if people can't understand her, presumably in the central west of New South Wales, not necessarily a huge number of Italian speakers?
She get frustrated?
Yeah, she definitely does get frustrated when she wants to try and ask for something or talk about something and there is that language barrier. I know the nursing home at times have gone to good old Google Translate at times to try and help out. So there have been times when, we have, have needed to go to the nursing home and just be that translator. It might be during the weekly GP appointment, or if the nurses are having difficulty understanding or talking to do a quick trip up there and try and help out.
When I think of Italians, I picture like the huge families around the dinner table and loads of cousins and aunties and uncles are all there to sort of support and help you. How does that compare with your own experience?
Yeah, I'm the complete opposite of that. So yeah, we'd come from a small family. So mum, dad, myself and my cousin are the main core people. We do have some extended families, but yeah, not from a big traditional Italian family where people help out and we can call people, but hey, I need a break, can you come and help out, while I go away for a couple of days or the weekend.
You've obviously been a carer for most of your life now. I wonder how you've changed as a carer during those years, because as you've said, you were helping out your mum who had panic attacks and anxiety, and then you've started looking after your nonna, but you've also grown, you've finished school, you're studying now. How's it changed your approach?
Yeah, so being a carer shaped my career. So my first job was a carer peer worker, and I was the first carer peer worker to be employed by that organisation, and it shaped the courses that I study as well. So I was doing my certificate in community services. Now I'm doing my diploma in counselling, and it's definitely enhanced, knowing that, enhanced my knowledge that there's no Brady Bunch family, as I like to call. There's no perfect family.
Absolutely not. There is no such thing.
Exactly. Every family has something going on behind closed doors. And you just don't know what people are going through that day. So it's definitely, shaped me. I've become very empathetic, to people, to members of our society. So.
Because some people would run the other way.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people would say, you know what, I have had enough of this.
Exactly.
It actually drew you in, really. It gave you such a foundation, and you've took that on in your career path.
Oh, 100%. And it's also, I've been able to raise awareness of young carers and also carers, in the workplace to consider carers as well, because, support workers aren't always there all the time. Emergencies can happen, and it's good for carers to be kept up to date, obviously with the consent of that person, but to be kept up to date with appointments or even generally on how the person's going.
There might be other young carers listening to this and maybe feeling a bit isolated, maybe a bit angry about the circumstances they're in. What would you say to them?
They're all normal emotions to be going through. Because everyone's circumstances are different, whether you're the primary carer or whether you're a secondary carer, the relationship that you have. But there is support available, as for an example, that Young Carer Dementia Support Group, but it's also important to reach out, through Carer Gateway or other services in your local area. Yeah, do not think that you're alone in this journey. And there are so many positive things that can arise from being a carer, like it shaped my career path, but also it doesn't define you. You can still do things your age. I've been able to go away with friends and have a breakaway and be a kid. I've been able to study. I've been able to do things that, you know, people might think, oh, you're caring for someone. You can't do that. You won't be able to do that. But hey, look, here I am now. I'm recording a podcast in a suburb that I've never been to in my life. So there's many things, you know, you can go into policy or advocacy work as well, if that's your passion, research as well. I know a lot of young carers that have gone down that path.
We've heard about how it's shaped your career and some choices you've made. What about how being a carer has shaped you as a person?
It's knowing that Mum and Nonna have been there for me. Now it's my turn to give and show them the care and love as well. It's also enhanced my knowledge around things as well, like through the medical system, knowing how to advocate for people and advocating for myself as well, knowing my rights as a carer as well. And it's just shaped me for who I am. I love it. I enjoy it. I wouldn't change anything for the world, even though I'm caring for 2 people. If somebody said, John, here's $1 million and forget about things, I'll say, no, keep your money.
You're happy the way it is?
I'm happy with what I'm doing.
John, thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
That's John, who cares for his nonna.
And before that, you heard from Tully Smythe, who cared for her mum.
Hold the Moment is a podcast from Dementia Australia, produced by Deadset Studios.
You can find more episodes and resources on Dementia Australia's website, dementia.org.au. And make sure you're following Hold the Moment so you don't miss an episode.
This show is hosted by me, Jim Rogers.
And by me, Hamish Macdonald. The executive producers are Kelly Reardon and Sarah Dabro. The producer is Liam Reardon. Production manager is Anne Chesterman. Sound design by Slade Gibson.
And a special thanks to the whole team at Dementia Australia and to everyone who shared their stories on this podcast.